are advised that this program contains images and voices of people who have died.
Good morning and welcome to the ABC's coverage of Anzac Day 2020. I'm here at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, where at 5:30 this morning we'll broadcast live the National Commemorative service. Throughout the day we'll bring you live coverage of those services that are taking place. You can join us at ABC TV and iView, the news channel and your local radio and Facebook pages, as well as at abc.net.au/Anzac Day. Before we start the service here in Canberra, coming up are a collection of individual stories featuring our dedicated servicemen and women. Stories that embody the qualities of our Anzacs: determination, bravery, sacrifice. This year, we find ourselves in a time when the entire world is under threat. The COVID-19 pandemic is having a profound effect on all of us, including the disruption of marches and commemorative services normally held here and abroad. However, we as a nation can still come together to remember and honour those who fought and died in service to their country, and give thanks and respect to serving members who continue to support us. Anzac Day marks the anniversary of the first major military action fought by Australian and New Zealand forces during the First World War. What unfolded 105 years ago on Turkey's distant shores would ultimately change the way we view ourselves forever.
Around 4 a.m. on the 25th of April 1915, the Anzacs rode from their transports towards shore under the cover of darkness. They landed at a small cove near Aribanu.
The men leapt into the water, and the first of them had just reached the beach when fire was opened on them from the trenches on the foothills, which rise immediately from the beach.
Facing steep hills and thick scrub, individuals and small groups of men pressed forward.
We scrambled up the hill for about 200 yards, dumped our packs, and started off at a fair pace from the firing line. Everyone was anxious to get up to them. We lost a few men advancing over an exposed piece of ground. It seemed funny to hear the bullets cutting into the scrub alongside of us as we went along. But no one seemed afraid.
By the evening of the first day, 16,000 Australian men had landed, with many more to come. But the Battle of the Landing cost the Anzacs dearly. Charles Bean later wrote,
They were men their countries could ill afford to lose. But with their lives, they purchased a tradition beyond all human power to appraise and set, for all time, the standard of conduct for the Australian and New Zealand soldier.
By early May, a stalemate had set in. 2 weeks later, on the 19th of May, the Turks launched a massive attack.
I was looking through the periscope, watching for a chance shot, when I heard a sort of a whining noise. I did not take much notice, and the next thing I remember was a terrific bang. I was covered with sandbags and dirt. All day long, they bombarded us.
After massing 42,000 men, all the men they had in the area, the Turks were met with machine guns and naval gunfire. They suffered around 10,000 casualties, including 3,000 dead. The Anzac troops spent most of the following months, until the end of July, just holding on. But as the summer heat increased, the men's physical condition deteriorated.
The trenches were alive with maggots, and when trying to get a few winks of the night, they would crawl all over you. To eat your meals or to try and get a little peace and quiet was impossible on account of the cursed flies.
Plagues of flies infested the battlefield, spreading dysentery, diarrhea, and enteric fever. Nurses stationed on nearby ships and at hospitals tried their best under difficult conditions to attend to the sick and wounded men. A nurse on the island of Lemnos recalled,
Convoy arrived, about 400. No equipment whatever. Just laid the men on the ground and gave them a drink. A good many died. It is just too awful. One could never describe the scenes.
On the 6th of August, a series of attacks were launched by the Allies in an attempt to break the stalemate. But the Turkish defences were strong and the troops were in poor condition, so the attacks proved costly failures. A diversionary bayonet charge to take the Turkish trenches at Lone Pine was bloody and wild and cost over 2,000 Australian casualties. On the 7th of August, on a narrow saddle of ground called the Neck, wave after wave of Australian light horsemen were shot down by the Turks. Over 200 were killed. The New Zealanders briefly held the main objective, Chunuk Bair, but by the 10th of August, the Allied offensive had failed. In the 4 days of attack and counter-attack, grenade duels and frenzied fighting, 7 Victoria Crosses were awarded to the Australians. In the following months, deteriorating weather gave a glimpse of the difficulties of sustaining a winter campaign. Freezing conditions, flooded trenches and blizzards found men dying of exposure.
I had 2 pairs of socks on and my feet in bags. Underpants, trousers, singlet, flannel, tunic, overcoat. And even then, I was nearly freezing.
The only solution was complete evacuation. In December, about 90,000 men were evacuated over 11 nights in a secret withdrawal operation from Anzac and Suvla, unnoticed by the Turks. Further British and French evacuations were conducted in January. Over the 8-month campaign, 2,721 New Zealand and 8,709 Australian soldiers were killed. The two nations had forged an Anzac legacy that would never be forgotten.
This year marks 75 years since the end of the Second World War, where almost 1 million Australians, both men and women, served and fought in campaigns that lasted 6 years. At the time of the German defeat, more than 39,000 Australians had lost their lives and another 30,000 had been taken prisoner. Able Seaman Derek Arthur Hollyoak remembers his time in service and those of his fellow shipmates aboard the HMAS Hobart.
My parents came from England as World War I soldier settlers. I was 3 months old, and of course that was hard times, were very hard because the Depression was on. Conditions were so hard, we were so poor. You know, we used to go to school with bread and dripping sandwiches, and we didn't have shoes. And then when the war broke out in 1939, and so what Dad did, he put his age down to join the army, and he put my age up to join the Navy. His words were, "I'm going to put you in the Navy, son, because I know you'll be safe there." And I just accepted that. I was 16 and a half actually when I joined the ship, but I was still doing a man's job. I was posted to HMAS Hobart. I hadn't seen a warship before. Going across the gangway, you couldn't imagine it. The whole ship was manually operated, so that's why you had a crew of upwards of 700. In my 3.5 years, the ship became my home. The ship's company became my family. The sea was calm. The sun had just set when there's this blinding flash, and the ship just rocked up in the air and rocked down again. That was when the torpedo hit. The safety valves actually blew off with a big bang. All the power went off. My job and my offsider had to go down below, put emergency power onto an oil pump. When the explosion hit, those 4 that were my crew, I think they were all blown over the side. The guy that took my place died. He hadn't been on the ship very long, and I always think about that man. Well, I think about the others too, but more so the guy that took my place, Seaman Phillips. We were in Adelaide when the bomb was dropped and peace broke out. There were these great big celebrations, and I felt a loss. When I left the Hobart, there were tears streaming down my eyes because that was my home. I didn't want to leave it.
Next, we share the story of a man who broke the barriers of poverty and racial discrimination to fulfil his dream to fly. He went on to become Australia's first and only known Indigenous fighter pilot during World War II. For many years, Len Waters' story was forgotten. Today, we remember and honour him and the estimated 3,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians who served their country during the Second World War.
Leonard Victor Waters is probably a pretty famous Kamilaroi man. He was the first and only Aboriginal fighter pilot in the Second World War. Being a young boy that left school at 14, along with his brother, my dad, Donald, and went to work for their father, sort of ring barking and shearing and things like that. And they actually both joined up to join the armed forces at the same time.
So we bade them farewell that day, and they went to Brisbane, and the rest is history.
There's a lot of accolades around the place, postage stamps, aerograms, streets, parks, and even the Warramai Hornet, which is an FA-18 fighter with all Indigenous colours all over it and his name on the cockpit. Uncle Len did about 95 sorties or 95 missions, and he graduated from being a ground mechanic when he first went there to when he left the Air Force. He'd actually attained the rank of warrant officer, which is probably equivalent to sergeant.
What was it like to fly the Kitty Hawks?
Oh, they were unreal. They were. Like, I mean, they didn't have the same power as a Spitfire or a Mustang or a Thunderbolt, but we actually had the best record against the Japs.
Len Waters was stunned when his daughter, preparing his biography, discovered he was Australia's only Aboriginal fighter pilot. He was shot 7 times, flying against the Japanese from Dutch New Guinea to Borneo.
Morotai was one of those places where fighting was pretty heavy, and there's a lot of horrific stories about that place.
They were captured back off the Japanese, and so they set up their main base there, and that's where he did most of his flying from.
The moment he got his wings, there was a Kitty Hawk that was actually named Black Magic, and another pilot who was actually flying Black Magic actually got pretty crook, so they had to fly him back to the mainland. And meanwhile, the commander said, well, he's a plane here and it's a good luck charm, I think, because it's named Black Magic. One of the anti-aircraft shells actually lodged between his seat and fuselage, but it didn't explode.
If it had hit 6 inches one way or the other, you wouldn't be interviewing me here today.
And he had a bit of a giggle about it and sort of said, well, it's the only first time ever that I didn't have to wait on anybody to get off the tarmac to land. He said everybody had taken off for the hills.
Len was a hero that came back, but was brought suddenly to earth when he found out that when he came back, he was just another black man.
And when they fought gallantly, and they come back thinking that they were liberators, only to get back and find out that they weren't even liberated.
Len was very disheartened when he came home and found he couldn't get a job and carry on his flying career.
They were still, blacks that had to go back to the mission way of life, back to shearing.
Mr. Waters has retired to Cunnamulla. He doesn't fly anymore, but the western skies he watches are big.
How old was he when he died?
73, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's what I reckon. He'd be in his 70s there.
Yeah.
The true legacy, though, is that if he can do that in times of real trial and triumph over that, in today's world, Aboriginal people can achieve just about anything that they dream of.
Our next story begins with a terrorist attack in Bali on the 12th of October 2002. The Bali Bombings killed 202 people, including 88 Australians, and injured more than 200 others. Darren King, an RAAF flight engineer, was part of the task force deployed to bring home 66 of our injured citizens. He also took part in the disaster relief operation for those in Aceh following the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004.
The whole point of this role, you do the military side of it, but then the humanitarian and aid is the stuff that really is rewarding. That's the stuff that you feel good about, because that's ultimately what we try to do the best of our ability. We can always go where civilian aircraft can't go, be it a war zone, be it wherever. We always find a way to get there, and we have the range, we have the capability, and we have the people who can do it. So yeah, it's our role. On the morning of the Bali bombings, 6:30 in the morning, did my usual Bathurst ritual, get all the domestics done in the house before sitting down in front of the TV to watch the race. Probably mid-morning to late morning, I got a call from the CO asking me if I'd been drinking. It was a bit early in the day to start drinking, but I said no, and he said, well, make sure you don't, and pack a bag. You'll be heading north to take some supplies up to Darwin and then on to Bali. We prepped the aeroplane, they loaded up the medical supplies, they took doctors, nurses, and everyone who was going to assist up there, up to Darwin. We grabbed more people, more equipment in Darwin, then launched into the flight to land in Bali the early hours of the morning. You didn't know what to expect, so you got there, and I guess you see Hollywood and you expect to hear a lot of noise, a lot of yelling, screaming, but everyone was just going about their business, doing their job. Yeah, the injured were quiet, the doctors were just doing what they had to do, the nurses doing what they had to do, and the quiet was quite surreal, to be quite honest with you. For me, being non-medical, a bit surprising, because we thought we'd just land, we'd have all these people ready to go, to put onto the stretchers and take them home, but we were there for quite a few hours waiting for people to be stable enough to be air transported. So that was probably a reality check. Probably the most confronting of all the humanitarian stuff that I experienced personally would have been Aceh. Flying over Aceh and the devastation was very confronting. Like, this went back hundreds and hundreds of metres. And while we're on the ground, some foreign doctors, I think they were Dutch, came over to us and asked if we could medevac a little baby that had just been born back in a humidity crib. We were able to medevac it to a more substantial hospital, and reports we had later that day was the baby survived and was standing a good chance of surviving, so that was one of the good stories. We, in the defence, particularly in my game, we don't understand the impact that it does have on your family. It's selfish from my personal point of view, because I love doing what I do. So yes, it may be viewed as selfless outside of defence, but I love doing what I do, and I'm just so fortunate that my family support what I do, understand what I do, but I'd never stretch that support or understanding to the point where I'd break them, because at the end of the day, I don't have them, I have nothing.
Anzac Day services and marches aren't the only events that have been disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The Invictus Games, which embody our sense of determination, strength and human spirit, has also been postponed this year. Invictus Games competitor, leading seaman Vanessa of the Royal Australian Navy, experienced firsthand the power of sport to overcome wounds both physical and mental she received during her service to country.
Oh, I'm ridiculously competitive. So into sport.
When I say go, the objective is to get the bat from the back to the front as fast as possible. No one looks back.
Sport has always been there, and people have used sport to recover and to become better people.
On your mark. Set. Go.
I'm leading seaman Vanessa Berryhill. This Invictus journey has changed my life. My dad was in the army. My grandfather, my great-grandfather was in the army, and so on and so forth. You get the picture. I think I'm perfect for military because I always say yes and I'm always happy about it. And in the army, I, obviously was carrying heavy things a lot, doing a lot of push-ups, and it was more of a degenerative thing. There was no one incident that caused my shoulder injury. I also have struggled with mental health over the years. I was diagnosed with both anxiety and depression in 2015 after what felt like years of suffering in silence.
It was after the birth of her second child. She started to become a bit more withdrawn and not quite so sure of herself. Between myself and another one of our girlfriends, we would talk about it, but and we'd ask if Vanessa was okay, but she'd always say that she was okay.
I guess it was probably hard for her to open up and talk about it. However, yeah, there are some subtle changes that we did notice.
I would be driving and I would think to myself, oh, wouldn't it be easier if I just had a car accident and just got to be in hospital for a little while? Oh, it makes me really sad, which I haven't told many people about because I didn't want to die because I loved my family and my kids. But I thought I just needed a break.
Yes, please. When she finally got the courage to admit that she was struggling and that she needed some emotional support, it was tough.
Thank you for all your help.
Thank you.
I asked for help, I got that help, and then I pushed through.
When Vanessa got involved with the Invictus sports stuff, her personal confidence started coming back.
I saw an opportunity to, get back into something I love. I felt I was ready to get better. When I first started the Invictus journey, I didn't tell anyone that I had mental health issues. It wasn't until my third or fourth camp that I finally started opening up and being honest. And I was shocked that so many of us have to go through these problems, but, relieved because I wasn't the only one.
It wasn't long ago that Australia suffered through its worst bushfire season ever recorded. Many lives were lost, as were homes, property, and our unique and beautiful wildlife. During this time, Australia faced a different kind of battle, one against nature. When natural disasters occur, the Australian Defence Force are always on standby to provide humanitarian assistance and, if needed, carry out evacuations. One such rescue involved a complicated Navy operation from a small town in the East Gippsland region of Victoria.
The background to why Choules ended up off Mallacoota was that Navy always provides over the Christmas period and the high risk weather season a response vessel. So this year it was Choules' turn. So Choules was on call at 48 hours notice to move. The reason why Choules was asked to go down, particularly for Mallacoota, is a unique environmental circumstance down there where Mallacoota was cut off. So the main roads were cut off by the fire, and with the amount of smoke in the air, the ability to get aircraft in. So the only evacuation operation was really via sea. And with upwards of potentially up to 2,000 people indicating that they were essentially trapped in Mallacoota, we had to get them out. I think perhaps the most challenging part of all of this was that it's never been done to this scale before, particularly out of Australia. So this is the first time in the largest operation that's ever been conducted by sea from an Australian town. We spent a lot of time talking. We did a number of town hall type activities where we spoke to everybody that was being evacuated and described the processes that would happen and some of the experiences they would go through, particularly on the boat. I just wanted to reassure and make them sort of feel safe and understand that the boat will bounce around, they will get wet, but it's okay, and they'll get out to the ship soon and be dry. So It was a really dynamic plan. It changed all the time, to be honest. Weather conditions were continually changing. One of the things that surprised us perhaps was the amount of pets. We expected a few pets, but one thing we learned is Australians do love to travel with their pets. So the number of dogs, the 4 or 5 cats, the parakeet, all those, that asked us to review what we were looking at. And also just the number of children and things that were involved as well. So the plan was continually being evolved as the conditions had changed, and I think, sometimes we were probably rewriting and redeveloping plans every half an hour or so.
This is how we drive the ship.
Wow, pretty amazing, huh?
It was the most rewarding experience that I've ever been involved in. The circumstances and the situation at Malakuta when we first arrived was horrific. But the response from the Australian public the whole way through was just so uplifting, and to be able to go in there and to be able to help out a fellow mate who was in need, to be able to do that and have the tools to be able to do that, and the training was just so rewarding, and it's just made 29 years worth of a career worth every second of it.
Soon we'll take you inside the Australian War Memorial for the National Commemorative Service. But unlike this one here in Canberra, memorials all over Australia will stand quiet today, including one of our oldest, located in a small town in the great southern region of Western Australia.
Murridup, a tiny hamlet in the great southern region of Western Australia, home to the state's first war memorial.
We have the oldest memorial in Australia, built in 1916, opened in September 1916, recording those people who played football and cricket in that little tiny area.
Built by the Murridup football and cricket clubs, it records the names of the 49 members who enlisted for service in World War I. 13 soldiers were killed in action and did not return home.
The family involvement was very strong because you have 3 sets of 2 brothers and you have 2 sets of 3 brothers. So almost the entire family's gone away.
More wars meant more men and women to commemorate.
My family's listed quite a lot. Cecil, unfortunately, was killed in action in Pozieres in France in 1916. So he's on the memorial behind me there, and of course the other 8 Larsons were in World War II and fortunately all came home.
All over Australia, the stories are being passed down to new generations.
My father used to come and wear his father's medals, and now William is carrying on the tradition and will keep up the tradition coming here to Murridup.
People needed to have some place to remember, to reflect, to try and understand. So our little memorial, yes, is connected to the National Memorial just the same as all the other memorials in Australia are.
Memorials like this one in Murridup can be found all across the country. They provide a place to commemorate those Australians who gave their lives in a war or operational service. Today, especially, we will remember them.
In just a moment, we'll bring you the National Commemorative Service. It will look different to other years as it will take place inside the memorial building and not on the parade ground. Australians of all walks of life and the servicemen and women who would normally attend to pay their respects can't this year. But by bringing you this important commemoration this morning, we can still acknowledge the importance of Anzac Day. The service will include a minute's silence at 6 a.m. Please join us, whether inside your home, on your balcony, at the end of the driveway, or at the farm gate. Australians will today remember in their own ways those who served, lest we forget.